In a context where the legal avenues for migration have become drastically reduced over time, criminal networks, human smugglers, have increasingly become the transport system for people who cannot move legally by themselves. So human smugglers facilitate irregular migration, they arrange transport, they make the migrant feel secure and confident in their journey. They provide the kind of services that we would expect from a facilitation or a relocation broker if we were planning an international move. I think the question to ask is, first of all, is it only criminal networks who move people? So in the dynamics of human smuggling, a lot of people who facilitate the movement of irregular migrants aren't criminal networks. While their action is criminalized by the fact they're helping people cross borders, they're not fundamentally an organized crime group. Often they're local, opportunistic entrepreneurs or people who are looking to make extra money from helping somebody get across a border. So a lot of irregular migration, if not the vast majority, is done by people as ordinary as you and me. And I personally don't think there's an issue so much of protection. Where the dynamic of protection of people on the move has come into play has been because either there's a very large scale of movement, perhaps linked to a conflict, or because the challenges of making that journey which migrants seek is incredibly difficult. So if it's hard to cross a sea, it's hard to cross a desert, it's hard to cross a militarized border when the neighboring state has deployed armed guards and drones. And that's when you find criminal networks who are facilitating irregular migration. In the dynamics of irregular migration, though, generally there are a lot of safeguards that are put in place to protect the migrant. And the migrants choose that. I mean, they are transporting the most valuable cargo that they have, which is themselves and the people they love. So in classic migration contexts, there are means of payment guarantees, so systems of escrow by which migrants might pay in advance, but they'll pay to a trusted third party. Amounts of money will only be released when they complete successful steps in their journey. These kinds of things keep a migrant safer. What makes them less safe is where either you only see the apex pyramid of criminal groups who can facilitate journey across a border, and then they're very at risk of kidnapping for ransom or labor exploitation or sexual exploitation, or being asked to maybe carry other forms of contraband, drug smuggling, along a particular journey, and when they themselves are vulnerable. So if they don't have much money to pay, if their states are not going to protect them, so they don't feel that they have any right of recourse, then they're vulnerable. So I think the question is, how do you make migrants less vulnerable? Well, you want to reduce the criminality of the state, and you want to help build those safeguards into play. The question around, what are the hotspots, where are the big flows, that changes over time. So it's almost a geopolitical question. Where are people moving from and where are they trying to get to that defines the hotspots? There are, globally speaking, hubs that have endured over time, partly because the conditions that I've just spoken about stay stable. So big cities, Bangkok is famed for being a sort of hub for irregular migration, where lots of the neighboring ASEAN country people sort of convene there. There is a lot of industry and economy and places to hide, places to work, criminal industries that have developed and embedded there. So a lot of these big economic hubs function in that way. Istanbul is another one. It's the gateway between Asia and Europe. So where you would expect them to be in some places, in some senses, but so what we would do when we analyze migrant smuggling, you would look for the hubs and then you would look for the routes between those hubs, and those can change a lot. But like all illicit industries, in some ways they track the licit industries. So where do people move to? How do people get there? They go on roads, they go on boats. So the illicit just goes under the radar, but often along the same journey. It's the underbelly, it's the shady parts of the same dynamics of global trade and global enterprise that we see everywhere else. Broadly, governments respond badly to transnational organised crime, particularly now. I think the overarching legal framework in the response to transnational organised crime is the UN Transnational Organised Crime Convention, UNTOC Convention, which is one of the most highly ratified global treaties, actually, but it is a criminal justice instrument. So as would perhaps be intuitive when you think of transnational organised crime, you think, okay, crime is responded to by policemen, it's responded to by the criminal justice system, so those are the sets of responses. But what you have to, I think, increasingly understand, precisely because of the last point I made, which is illicit activity is often very closely interrelated and shadows the licit industry, that there's a lot of socioeconomic and political drivers to the illicit economy that the criminal justice system can't or won't capture. So if you go back to the question of irregular migration, and a key part of the discussion we had today in the class was that you can't respond to the criminal aspects of the irregular migration facilitation, so the human smugglers or the trafficking, without also addressing the drivers of migration and the dynamics of migration. And criminal justice instruments aren't going to do that. So really now at the cutting edge of the discussion around the response to transnational organised crime is the fact that you need integrated responses. You need to look at the underpinnings. So what are the livelihoods in play? Who are the groups involved? How are they understood in their communities? And there's a big differentiation between the kinds of labour-intensive illicit industries that involve a lot of people, of which migration is one, but drug production is classically the other, so where you have enormous numbers of coca growers or opium producers, versus those that maybe can be done by a very small number of people. And then look at the entire supply chain and movement of the commodities and the enablers of that, so all the people who sit in the essence of the illicit, but also those who sit on the borderlines, the money launderers, the lawyers who help create the architecture by which illicit activity can be veiled, the political economy of protection and facilitation and corruption. I mean, it's a complex problem and it's very deeply embedded now. And it is, I would say, one of the greatest yet lowest profile of threats, unless a government chooses to change that. So whereas often terrorism you get a lot of focus on, but at the same time terrorism kills less people, it costs less, it involves a smaller proportion of the population, but garners a huge response because it's very symbolic and it's very visible. Transnational organised crime is just a slow erosion, it's a creeping, again, shadow industry. And often there isn't an enormous amount of political will to underpin it. So, you know, some say that it's in organised crime, it's in the illicit economies where we do what we really want to do. And nobody wants to close down those possibilities.